Today we're talking about the Avatar The Last Airbender episode, The Blue Spirit. And this is actually going to be kind of a quick review, despite the fact that this is a very iconic episode of the show. Because there's only so many times I can say, the show made it really obvious that Zuko wasn't going to be a villain the whole time, before it just becomes too redundant. Which means, yes, I do think there is a point where my content will become too redundant. Haven't reached it yet, though. And the reason that's a concern, if concern is even the right word, is because this episode is a direct sequel to the last one. The inciting incident of this episode is that Sokka and Katara are sick. They've caught a cold from their exposure to the storm in the previous episode. And Aang has to go out and find a way to cure their cold so that they can move on with their journey, and also so his friends aren't suffering. Like, they're clearly feverish because Sokka's, like, seeing stuff and forgetting things, right? And while he's out, he is captured by Zhao, who is now Admiral Zhao, who has used his new pool as an admiral to make finding the Avatar a major priority for the Fire Nation, leasing some really skilled archers from another command in order to do so, putting all of his substantial resources behind beating Zuko to the punch on this. He even sends men to Zuko's ship to try to absorb any of the information that Zuko might have on Aang's whereabouts. But also, as all this is happening, something very interesting happens. As we see Zhao leasing these archers from that command, as I mentioned, we see that he's being watched by a mysterious figure in a blue mask, the titular Blue Spirit. And so we're left wondering throughout the episode, who is this person? What are their motives? Why are they watching Zhao? Are they an ally or an enemy? And it's a lot of fun. It's a fun little mystery that doesn't even last until the end of the episode, but it's a fun little mystery to keep you thinking about the plot while the first roughly half of this episode happens, which is very comedically driven. There's a lot of gags in here that really set the tone for the comedy throughout the rest of the season. We've been getting the comedy in bits and pieces prior to this, but it's been a little inconsistent. But this episode, the comedy feels really in line with how the comedy is going to be handled throughout the rest of the season and the rest of the series overall. In fact, Sokka's feverish antics in this one really feel in line with his antics later, his funny goofiness later, where his previous goofiness didn't always quite feel like it was there yet. And there are a couple of super iconic jokes in this one. There's a whole bit in the background where Katara and Sokka are alone. Zhang's out looking for a cure for them, and they need water, so they try to get Momo to get him water, and he just keeps bringing back random crap. That's very funny. But all that is to kind of put a cushion between the really serious previous episode and the serious second half of this episode, because Aang gets captured trying to recover frozen frogs for his friends to suck on. He got the information from a crazy hermit lady with a cat, who we will revisit later, and that's also very funny when that happens. But being out looking for the cure and not having time to waste, he draws attention to himself. He's captured by these archers who are, like, let's use a topical example. They're all basically Hawkeye, every single one of them. Like, they're that good. And he's chained up in this fortress by Zhao, a fortress that he likely acquired using his influence as an admiral. And they don't intend to kill him, because if they kill him, he'll just be reincarnated, and then in like 12 to 16 years, you'll have another avatar to worry about, and you won't know who it is until they show up. But just as things seem hopeless, because there really isn't anybody coming for him as far as he knows at this point, Aang is surprised when the Blue Spirit shows up and cuts him loose with these cool twin swords. And knowing who the Blue Spirit is going into the episode feels completely different than watching it for the first time did. Because I'll spoil it right now. The Blue Spirit is Zuko. He was keeping an eye on Zhao, and he's here to save Aang now, because if anybody but him recovers the Avatar for the Fire Nation, like long term, right, is the final person to do it, he won't reclaim his honor from his father. So his motivations here are selfish, but he and Aang still fight their way out of this fortress together, and while they do communicate a little bit, it's handled very well, the showing us of how well these two work together with very little communication. Their escape from this fortress is one that I'm not going to spoil much in this video. I'll show a couple examples of it, and I'm not going to spoil it much in this video because it's one of the sequences in the show that you just have to watch. It's spectacular. So much so that M. Night Shyamalan even, he attempted to ape it. He didn't really succeed. for his protracted visual Wikipedia summary of the season that I will probably eventually talk about. I'm not sure yet. As well as the next scene, which he used completely wrongly, where after realizing that the blue spirit is Zuko, after he gets knocked out by one of the archers from a distance, and then Aang is not able to leave him behind even though they're enemies, Aang, once he wakes up, talks about how back in his day, he was friends with people from the Fire Nation, and he misses that, not just because he misses his specific friends, but because he misses being able to be friends with people from the Fire Nation, from any nation, and wonders if they lived in a different time, he and Zuko could have been friends. And while Zuko does attack him, causing Aang to run off, go recover some more frogs, and then cure his friends, the look on Zuko's face after Aang goes, and then the way he looks, I don't even know what the right word is, looks with like reservation, with contemplation, at the big Fire Nation symbol hanging on his wall before he turns in, once he arrives to the ship. They tell me that he's kind of been wondering the same thing. Fighting alongside the Avatar, he's finally starting to see this kid as an actual person. And you could tell he wouldn't be doing this if he didn't have such a compelling reason to do so. He's just not that kind of person. And so, following directly from the previous episode that showed us that these characters have similar, if sometimes equal but opposite backstories, but they also work super well together. They gel well together. They have a lot of group chemistry with each other. And yeah, they probably could be friends. And you kind of want them to be. You kind of get to a point by the end of this episode where you want them to be. Like, what would that be like? Maybe they wouldn't have to worry about this Zhao guy so much anymore, since he is a problem for both of them. And it gets you primed to be really excited for that once it finally happens later in the show. And I love that. In fact, there's a lot of just little Easter eggs in this episode. I'm not going to get into all of them, but there's little Easter eggs in this episode that hint at stuff to come later in the show. Like Zhao mentions finally breaking through the walls of Ba Sing Se at some point. That's one of the things he talks about in this episode. I don't even think we'd heard of Ba Sing Se before this. But here it is mentioned, and that's going to be a major component of the show later on. And at the very least, if we had heard it mentioned, here we have the Fire Nation specifically talking about their plans for it. This year in universe, which is a thing that happens. It's just a fantastic episode. Like, I've said this before, very few of these episodes could be considered bad, but this one's just, like I used the term iconic before, it's iconic. Like, Zuko is only the Blue Spirit a couple times in the show, and the Blue Spirit is an iconic part of this series, in part because of how iconic this episode is. I don't have anything else to say about it. It's just really spectacularly good in terms of its storytelling, its emotional drive, and the visuals. The visuals in this are excellent as well. It has kind of a mood that hangs over the whole frickin' thing. It's just great. And then the humor, all of it hits home in this one, I think. This is just one of the best episodes of the whole show. As per usual, though, guys, what do you think of this episode? If you have seen it, let's get a discussion going in the comments section down below. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video, share it with anyone else you think would enjoy my content, subscribe if you haven't. You can also check out links to my various social medias, as well as the many ways you can help out the channel. Those will be in the video description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later. I don't know why I started